acrylic yarn is not the enemy. It's not as bad as it's made out to be by some people on social media. In some circumstances, it might actually be the best yarn for your project or for you or for your budget. So today I want to share with you my top do's and don'ts of working with acrylic fibered yarn. Hopefully they'll help you to make the best selection of the acrylic yarns that are available to you, or to get the best out of working with that particular fibre. I'll be really interested to see if you agree with them. I don't think they're too controversial, but you never know. When crocheting with acrylic yarn, do buy within your budget. And that sounds so silly to start off with, doesn't it? Because obviously you're not going to spend more money than you have. But one of the downfalls of acrylic yarn is because it's cheap. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, it's so cheap and I need this and that and the other, and I put them all in my basket and I don't do the maths before I go to the till, and then it costs me more money. Do check the texture before you buy it. This is a really interesting one, and obviously you can't do this if it's one that you're buying online, but maybe you could sneak into a hobby store and find the equivalent and give it a rub. But this is literally what I do. I take the yarn and I rub it, and then I run it between my fingers like that. So some acrylic yarn is much rougher than perhaps it needs to be, or other types of yarn are. Just run it between your fingers and that will tell you whether you're going to get on with the texture or not. Do check for fraying and snagging before you buy it. When you look at strands of the yarn, and obviously it will be in a skein in the shop, or in a ball, or a cake, or a hank. There's so many words, aren't there? Just look at it. Honestly, the number of times that I have picked up a ball of yarn in the shop, had a look through it, and just been able to see points that it's fraying or splitting, that's brilliant. That's giving you information you need. So just from being slightly roughly handled in a shop, this is already coming apart. It's not the yarn for you. It's going to annoy you when you work with it. So do check for frays and splits before you buy the yarn. Do use a hook with a smooth head. Here's a hook. Here is the yarn. The best hooks, this little gap here, this little hooky gap, is completely smooth, which means that as you work the yarn, it will pass smoothly through it. Yarns that are more likely to fray, I find, are even more frustrating to work with a very slightly burred hook. And all you need to do to check that the hook is right for your yarn is to pick up the yarn and just run it through, just like that. That alone will tell you whether it's going to snag and annoy you or whether it's the right hook for that yarn. Do look at reviews. Now, I must say, some reviews need to be taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt. There are different motivations for reviewing. I love watching reviews, right? But we are aware that these products are sent to people, and there are some people who will review a yarn and be honest. Like, I completely trust Tony from TL Yarncraft's reviews on yarn. She says when she doesn't think something's good, and that's great. But some people, when they're sent yarn to review, they feel like they have to put a positive spin on it because they've been sent it, and so it can be a little bit misleading. People like you and me who write anonymous reviews on websites about different brands of yarn have no reputation at stake for doing it. We're just saying and telling other people for the sake of passing on the information, and those are the reviews that I predominantly like to go to know whether I'm going to be happy with a yarn, and also it'll tell you good things about it and the pitfalls, and if you know the pitfalls, you can work around them sometimes. So do read all the reviews. With acrylic yarn, do allow for a little bit of stretch, and this is even true when I'm crocheting toys with acrylic yarn. I think that I need a slightly tighter tension than I do when I'm doing it with the cotton blend. But if you're making a garment or a blanket and you want it to be a specific size, just remember that acrylic has some stretch to it. It's not going to stay exactly the size that you put it together. Now, hopefully it'll stretch fairly uniformly, but allow for the fact that acrylic has a little bit more give than some other types of fibre. Do check the dye lot. I say this a lot, I'm sure I've said it on this channel before, but it's so important, and I have screwed up like that before more than one time. Enough times for it to be an embarrassing recurrence. Check the dye lot. Buy all of the amount that you need at the same time so that it is the same dye lot. It is crazy how much same colour on paper yarn differs between dye lots. Do, when buying acrylic yarn, check the dye lot. And do choose your colours carefully. Don't just go in and buy them off the cuff. Think about what you're going to use that colour palette for and plan ahead. And especially when I tend to find that acrylic yarns can have some of the most garish, if that's the right word, colours. And I love a bright colour, but matching them together is therefore something you need to be a little bit careful about. So do plan your colours with acrylic yarn quite carefully. And remember that after they are washed, They can change a little and even leach if you're not lucky. Do consider pairing it with another fibre. There's a sort of DIY melange thing when you have, you know, one strand of your acrylic and another strand of your cotton or your something really nicely textured like merino wool. I love merino wool. It's my favourite thing to feel. So soft. But do consider two strands at once. Obviously you have to adjust your hook size accordingly, but it can be a great way to sort of bulk out a project price-wise much more cheaply is to combine acrylic with the texture of fibre that you prefer. Do read the label. There's a lot of useful information on the label, and it's not just about recommended hook sizes, which by the way I often differ from by sort of up to 1 millimetre or 2, even depending on the projects that I'm doing. But do read the label. There's useful instructions, and particularly for things like washing, which brings us very neatly onto the don'ts. Don't wash acrylic yarn on a hot wash. I would in fact use a hand wash only cycle, or literally just hand wash anything made from acrylic yarn. Or if you for some reason want to wash the yarn before you use it, really gentle, really low temperature. Don't tumble dry acrylic yarn. It will melt. Don't use acrylic yarn as oven gloves or a tea cozy, or even probably as a cup warmer thingy, you know, that you put your cup into. It's like this, but pretty with crochet. Don't use it for swimwear. I do see it recommended for swimwear sometimes, but one of the things about acrylic yarn is it really holds water. And I don't know if you've ever got something made of acrylic yarn wet, the extent to which it becomes sodden. And then when you think about the natural stretch in the fibre as well, that's just not a situation any of us want to be in on the beach or at the pool. Crocheting swimwear is a wonderful thing to do with cotton yarn. Don't do it with acrylic yarn. Don't buy it just because it's cheap. I know that like almost all of us are constantly stressing about money, especially at the moment, and worrying about how to balance finances, but still continuing to do the things that we're passionate about. And for a lot of you know, you're making things to sell at markets and stuff like that. You need the yarn to produce the thing that brings you joy and then hopefully brings you some money as well. But don't buy it just because it's cheap. Buy it because it has a potential use, or it brings you joy, if you can afford that joy. And finally, and I think this is the most important one for me, and possibly the point of why I sat down in front of my camera today, is don't be put off trying to work with acrylic yarn. Yeah, it's got its downsides, but there are downsides to everything else too. Cotton has all kinds of ethical issues around it, and as well as being slightly rougher in a lot of cases. A lot of people are allergic to wool, so that's not a good choice for them either. Polyester can sort of shed. There are a lot of reasons to object to any kind of yarn fibre that you might use, and just don't be completely put off acrylic if it's something that might work for you. Take into account its potential downsides and then make the best of it, especially if you already own it. Give it a go. But what do you think? Do you like acrylic yarn, or are you not such a fan? Let's have a chat in the comments section below, and I'd be so interested to hear what you think of my do's and don'ts, whether you agree, what you'd add to it, and yeah, let's have a friendly chat there. Happy crocheting.